everyone. Welcome back to the Long Lens Podcast. This is the podcast where I answer questions from my YouTube and filmmaking community, and we just talk a lot about filmmaking and YouTube. Today is another Q&A podcast. It's a few days after Thanksgiving. I haven't shaved in a while, so I might look a little haggard, but we're going to answer some questions. This is the last Q&A of 2024. So the Q&A portion is pretty much the bread and butter of this podcast. So basically how it works, I ask for questions on the YouTube community page and on Patreon, and then I just try to answer them to the best of my abilities. I'm kind of a kook. I don't know everything, but I have been on this platform and I've been using cameras for a really long time. So I just try to answer them to the best of my abilities. So a few housekeeping things. One of the perks of supporting me on Patreon is that you get your questions answered first and you get a little shout out. So if you would like to support this channel, support this podcast, you can join me on Patreon. Link will be in the show notes below. So let's dive right into the Patreon questions first. The first one is from Ramal Prasad, and Ramal asks, "Hey man, so I got two questions for you. My first one relates to Vlog and Rec 709 picture profile recording. Like, what is the difference with regards to when recording with Vlog, then having to convert it to Rec 709 in post, as opposed to recording natively in Rec 709 directly? Just a curious thought." Okay, so I'll try to tackle that one first. I'm pretty sure that you actually get more dynamic range when recording in Vlog, so you'll get more detail in the shadows and the highlights, whereas when you record in Rec 709, all that shadow and highlight information is baked in. Now with 10-bit codecs, you can still recover a little bit, but you'll be able to recover a lot more when shooting in a log profile. So that's kind of the whole idea of shooting in log, is that you have a little bit more wiggle room in the highlights and the shadows. All right, the next question is, additionally, I want to know, what are your thoughts on my train of thought as a potential setup that I have in mind for my camera? So I have the OG S5 and I'm thinking to use my camera as a hybrid camera, whereas photography would be like a budget full frame lens, like the Mikey lenses. And for videography, I would want to use an S35 or APS-C cine lens, like the Surrey Anamorphic 1.33x squeeze and the Surrey Nightwalker lens. Like, would I be able to get by with an approach like this? P.S. I'm a budget enthusiast videographer for the very lower end of budget spectrum. With that type of setup, I don't think that's a bad combo at all. I don't know which Mikey lens you're talking about. If I was going to go for a photography lens, I'd probably want a autofocus one. Maybe I'm just out of the loop and Mikey has been making some autofocus lenses for L mount, which they very well could be. If you're on a really low budget. I have a collection of Vivitar lenses that I bought, and I think the entire lens kit is under 150 bucks. So if it was me personally, I would just use something like a Sigma 28-70, like what I have right here. This is my hybrid lens. I use this for photos and for video, and I love it. So this lens, I think you can get around 500 bucks in the used market. So this is the one that I use for my S5 IIX, and I love it. So this next question is from Nolan Natasha, and Nolan asks, "I've noticed that you've made lots of useful conversion LUTs for cheaper cameras that aren't supported by plugins like Cinematch, like most recently your OG Mavic Mini to Vlog L conversion LUT. Can you talk a little bit about the process of creating these LUTs? Insta360 cams aren't supported by Cinematch and Film Convert, and I'd love to create a conversion to supported log profile like Vlog L, so that I could blend my Go 3 footage into a project where I'm using Film Convert. There are occasional POV things or weird angles where the camera is useful, but half the time I don't take advantage of it because I don't want the headache of trying to match it later." Yes, that's a really good question, and it's kind of a long process to match two different types of cameras. And even when you make a conversion LUT, it's not 100%. I would say that my conversion LUTs are probably like 98% there. It's just that different sensors, different cameras, they interpret color differently. So even when you try to match it perfectly, it's not going to be the same, especially when you try to match like a 10-bit image to an 8-bit image. The way that I do it is I use a color checker card, which I don't have mine on me right now, but you have to have a color checker card. You shoot scenes with both the cameras in the same spot with the color checker, and then you essentially just need to go into whatever color grading tool you use. I use DaVinci and Premiere a lot, and I just try to manually match the Rec 709 footage to the log footage. So it usually involves taking the contrast and saturation down, and then you have to go into the color wheels and even the curves and select certain colors and just shift them around until you, and what I do is I have my RGB parade up and I can look at both of the RGB parades. So I try to match them perfectly. So the RGB parade from the log footage needs to look as close as it possibly can to the RGB parade from the Rec 709 footage. When I've taken down all of the contrast and the saturation and brought up the shadows and all that, they need to look very, very similar in order for LUTs that work on that log footage to work on the Rec 709 footage that I've turned into log. So it's a little bit of a hassle to do. I'm not going to lie. Those aren't the funnest LUTs to make, but they do help. And I found that the ones that I've made, I can take LUTs that are created for that specific log profile and use them on footage with that conversion LUT, and it works. So yeah, hope that helps. Maybe I'll do a more in-depth video on that on Patreon one of these days. And another question from Nolan is, oh, and one more thing. Do you use any AI podcast editing software that is out there? I've been looking at Descript to auto-cut podcast conversations and then export to Final Cut for additional tweaks. Just wondering if you've used any of these tools for your podcast. No, I actually haven't used any AI tools for my podcast. I cut this manually, and maybe that's not the best practice, honestly. It takes a little bit of time, but I find that I'm faster than AI can be, especially because I know where I want to cut things out. I already know that, because I used to have a speech impediment, I do still stutter every once in a while, and I can kind of pick up where I'm going to stutter or where I'm going to, trip over words. And so I can anticipate that way better than AI can. So yeah, I don't use any AI tools. I just cut everything by hand. So the last written question on Patreon is from Ivan Martinek. And Ivan asks, according to you, in videography, what is the beginner's versus the expert's mindset? Okay, to be honest, that's kind of a hard question for me to answer. I don't necessarily consider myself a videographer, at least not like a working videographer. I don't do a lot of, paid corporate interviews, anything like that. In like my niche, which is, YouTube, budget filmmaking, that type of stuff. I think that when you're a beginner, I feel like you focus a lot more on how your video looks, but not necessarily the substance of your video. Whereas I've gotten better at what I do, I try to focus on the actual substance, because the way that my video looks is almost an afterthought. And that's because I feel like I have that part dialed to an extent, but creating a video that actually keeps people captivated is way harder. And I think that's what you focus on more as you get better at this craft. So now we have a SpeakPipe message from Lyndon Labayan. Lyndon's got a pretty cool YouTube channel as well. You should go check out. I think that wedding filmmaking is his main thing, so you should definitely go check that out. But let's hear what Lyndon has to say.
Hey, Nigel, I'm going to sneak in 2 questions here. Hopefully I make a cut. If I don't, it's all good. What's the weirdest, most left field item or service you've been asked to check out as a YouTuber / filmmaker and make a video for? And also, not really related, but kind of related, when is it okay, or when have you felt okay to ask for monetary compensation to make a video for an item or service? Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great question, Lyndon, and very topical right now for sure. So the first question I've gotten, man, I might even start collecting these and post them on Threads or something like that. But there's so many completely left field items that I get asked to review on my channel. I've gotten a lot of very strange requests. I've gotten requests for, power tools, AI robots, hair dryers, vacuums, all of these very weird stuff where it's just the person sending me this email didn't even check out my channel. They don't even know what I do. If you have gotten some seriously out of pocket requests, definitely leave them in the comment section below. I would love to hear what other people have experienced as far as product offerings from different brands to review on their channel. Cause I wish I could think of more right off the top of my head, but I feel like the most common ones are hair dryers, hair curlers, vacuums, power tools, that kind of stuff. And as far as the second question, I feel like there's an entire video that could probably be talked just about that one specific subject. The way that I think of it is, if I'm taking on a product and putting it in front of the 156,000 subscribers that I have, I always think of it as I'm doing this company a favor. I don't care how expensive the product is. I'm doing them a favor. I'm making essentially a free marketing video for them. And most of the time, I don't ever get paid. I sometimes get to keep the items and sometimes I don't. A perfect example is that Laowa lens. I sent it back. I tested it out and I really and a lot of people, I've seen the argument is oh yeah, you make affiliate money and you make AdSense money. It's very, very small, at least in my like in my current niche. It didn't do very well, so that's probably why. Really, I'm doing Laowa a favor, and Laowa has been, a big supporter of my channel. They've, they've lent me lenses for a while now because I like Laowa. I think that they make really cool lenses. They're pretty not budget friendly for most people, but I like, trying them out. But in those situations, I definitely feel like I'm doing Laowa a favor. They're not doing me a favor, sending me a lens to review. I don't need that. Honestly, anybody can get into the reviewing products space. You can go to lens rentals and rent a bunch of stuff and review it, and it doesn't really cost you that much. You could buy stuff and then return it, and it doesn't cost you anything. So like if you're making a marketing video for a brand, I feel like I don't see anything wrong with people taking on free pieces of gear and making essentially free marketing videos. I think where it gets a little bit hazy is when they call them reviews, because in the past, a lot of the reviews were from people who bought the item and then are giving very unbiased takes on that item. When I do a review, I try to make sure that I actually bought the item and I'm using the item. When I feel it's okay to get paid is when it's a service that I'm not going to make an entire video on that I actually like. For example, audio. That's a service that I like and I use them for all my videos. I don't mind getting paid making a 60-second mid-roll integration for audio. I have no qualms with that. If I'm going to do a paid video for a company that makes a physical product, that's where it gets a little bit more. I have to really think about whether or not I want to make a video on that product, and I have to really like it. For example, I did 4 videos for Panasonic about this S5 IIX. Now, the last one was titled a review. In hindsight, I wish I would have titled it Overview, because I was kind of giving like the overall synopsis of the things that I liked about it. But I made 4 videos dedicated to this Lumix S5 IIX. I got to keep this camera, which was one of the things that I negotiated for, and I got paid. Not honestly that much, but I still got paid by Panasonic to make a video about this. And all of those videos were marketing videos. Panasonic used them in their marketing. They used a lot of my clips. That was part of the contract, was I had to send them a lot of the raw footage that I shot with this so that they could use it in their marketing material. So I don't really feel that bad like making a video like that, because that's essentially like working for a client making commercials. I think that like commercials almost look differently now on YouTube than they used to. When you think of like a traditional commercial, it's not the same as what I did for Panasonic, but that's what's effective on YouTube, is people actually going out, using them, giving them their thoughts. Most of my sponsored videos on my channel have been services like Skillshare, Squarespace, Milanote, Audio, MusicBed, all of those, Film Convert. All those things are services or digital products or digital services. Those are all things that like I feel like it makes a lot more sense, because they can be small little pieces of your video. They're not the entire video. When I say a video is sponsored by, insert company name, it's usually the entire video isn't about that sponsor. It's just a small little section. And that's where the majority of YouTube funds come in, is through those types of sponsors. Something I don't talk about too often is I actually do have other forms of revenue now. So I didn't have to take on as many sponsorships. And that's why the majority of my videos aren't sponsored. If you look at like the majority of my videos, they might have free gear that I was sent, but they're not sponsored videos. And there is a distinction. When someone offers to send me a free piece of gear, like my response in email form is, feel free to send it to me. I make no guarantee that I'll even make a video about it. That's how I respond. When I get a sponsorship, this is different. When I get a sponsorship, there's contracts that I'm signing, there's deliverables, there is approval process, there's content briefs, and I'm contractually obligated to make a video. When I'm sent a product, I'm not contractually obligated to do anything. I could never make a video about that product, and I've made no promises to said company. So all of the videos that I've made for products that were sent to me, in my opinion, I'm doing that company a favor by even making a video, because I could just as easily send it back and say, I don't want it, So that's the way that I think about it. There's a lot of different discourse and, different viewpoints on this subject, but that's how I think about the whole brand sponsorship, stuff like that. I always disclaim when a company has sent something to me. I always do. You have to. If you read the FTC guidelines, you have to disclaim when a company is involved in a certain product. But there's a difference between a company being involved in sending it to me as opposed to being involved where like they're actually paying me, they have me under contract, they have an approval process. I think that's very, very different than just them saying, here, try out this lens. And if I don't want to, I can just say, no, take it back, Anyways, I hope that answered your question, Lyndon. That's a kind of a long-winded answer. And I keep telling myself I want to make a video about this on my second channel, talking a little bit more, but that's my opinion on that. Okay, now we're going to go into the YouTube community page. First question, Lumix G85 versus GH4 for photo and video. Only lenses needed for the Micro Four Thirds. That's hard. The G85 has image stabilization. It basically only has one codec and there's no Vlog-L, and you have a weird crop whenever you plug in a monitor. The GH4 doesn't have any extra crop when you plug in a monitor. It does not have image stabilization, but it's got a bunch of different codecs, including all-eye codecs. And if you record to an external monitor, you get 10-bit 422. If you're okay with using a gimbal and you don't really need image stabilization built into the body, I would say get the GH4. But honestly, if you have the money for the GH4, I would honestly just recommend the GH5 because it has the best of both worlds. It's got the image stabilization of a G85 and then all of the options of the GH4 plus some, and you have 10-bit internally. So my opinion is try to find a GH5. They're honestly not that, like the price difference from a G85 to a GH5 is honestly not that much, maybe a couple $100 more. So that's what I would say. The only lenses for Micro Four Thirds, I can just tell you the only lenses that I have right now for Micro Four Thirds, which are the 12 to 35, which is what you're seeing me on right now. And I have somewhere here the 25mm f1.7. Those are the only lenses I have. The only lenses I really feel like I need right now. I might end up getting the 35 to 100 just because I want a small telephoto lens. But yeah, those are the only ones that I have, and I feel like you can get a lot done with those two. All right, so next question is Mac versus PC for video editing. I feel like if you're not a gamer, go for Mac. You can get a M1 Max MacBook Pro for honestly not that much. Could you build out a PC for around the same price and have a little bit more performance? Yeah, but PCs are a little bit more buggy. When you build them out yourself, sometimes there's compatibility issues. Mac is really hard to beat. They're very efficient. And honestly, like I've stacked timelines on Premiere Pro, which should tell you something. And I haven't felt even the slightest hiccup. I have an M1 Max MacBook Pro. If you go watch the Danny Gevirtz video where he talks about his like MacBook setup, I have Danny Gevirtz's exact specs except for the internal hard drive. So that's what I have. And I haven't had literally any hiccups. And I edit, 10-bit 422 stuff from the GH5 and the S5 2X in Premiere Pro, and it's been perfect. So, all right, so next question is, hey, Nigel, you have been offered many good questions. Tell us more about your studio light. It looks like you have a pop-up umbrella, right? I'm looking for a nozzle of 85 to 90 centimeters in diameter, inexpensive, and giving soft light. Thank you. Yeah, so I talk about my key light a lot on this channel, or on my main channel and this channel. But honestly, the light isn't really that important to make the light this soft. It's the modifier, which the light, just so you know, is the ML60, which is a smaller version of the SL60. So it's a smaller light. It can go on one of these cheap Ulanzi light stands, which I've featured in one of my main channel videos, which I'll put up right up here somewhere. But the modifier is the Photech soft lighter, and this is the 46-inch version. There is a Godox version of this, which is a little cheaper. I like the Photech version just because this is honestly just really good quality. Patrick O'Sullivan from the Wandering DP uses this exact one for his talking heads, and that's how I found out about it. So if you want nice soft light, go for something like this, because what happens is you blast the light onto this reflective umbrella, and then all the light particles break and they come reflected back through another sheet of diffusion, and then that softens it even more. So it's kind of like a really simple to use book light. So that's the talking head setup that I use. All right, so next question is, okay, so why don't you give a try an old Sony APS-C camera and stuff? I recently got my hands on a dirt cheap Sony a6300, and the footage out of it is absolutely mind-blowing. So yeah, give old Sony APS-C cameras a try, or even the Alpha DSLR or SLR ones too, like the A58. I have given Sony APS-C cameras a try. I used the Sony a6000 back in the day and I liked it, except for the fact that you couldn't run audio into it. And I'm sure the a6300 still gives a great image. The problem is that camera overheats, much like most of those Sony Alpha 6000 series cameras. All of them overheat. That's why you would need to switch up to the FX30 to get one with a fan in it. But recording 4K for long periods of time makes those cameras overheat. I'm thinking about getting the a6000 again and making a whole video on it. That's the last camera that I think will be in my legendary camera series. That's the last one that I owned before they just all got really good. I have used Sony APS-C cameras. I like them for the most part. Everything pre-A6400 had really bad color though, or I guess even the A6400 had the bad colors. I think the A6700 was the first one with, you know, better colors internally. That's the one thing is that like whenever the sun comes in and out, it makes this freaking window blow. Let's see. I'm gonna turn this down. Sorry, I know this is riveting for everyone who's just listening to the audio version. Okay, and the last question for this month's Q&A is, do you think that the G9 is still relevant in 5+ years? Do I think the image is still going to be good? Yeah. Do I think it's going to be relevant? Probably not. It's similar to how I think about the GH5. I think that in 5-10 years, the image from the GH5 is still going to look good. You can't really say that about some of the other cameras that I've talked about, like the GH3. I think in 10 years, you look back at the GH3 footage and it's like, oh, okay, it's kind of soft. A lot of moire, a lot of artifacting in the shadows. But once you get to a 4K 10-bit 422 image, it's gonna look good for a while. I think that all cameras nowadays are gonna look good, 10, 12, 15 years in the future, just because, you can only get so high resolution that it's just not gonna really matter anymore. And I feel like the GH5 still creates an image that's like perfectly suitable for 90% of us. Yeah, the G9 was a cool camera. It was one of the cameras that I don't think I've ever used. I know a lot of people who did use it, and even in my tier list video, that was the one that I forgot was the G9, because sometimes I forget that it even exists. It's still a good looking image, pretty much a similar image to a GH5. It just doesn't have any of the all-eye codecs. It's just got the H.265, I believe. But as far as contrast-based autofocus, it had one of the best integrations of it. A lot of people were using it with the 16 millimeter Sigma lens and getting pretty reliable autofocus for like YouTube videos. So it was a cool camera. It's probably going to be less relevant just because there'll be better options for not that much more. So anyways, that was all the questions that I have for this month's podcast. So I say this all the time, but this time I really mean it. Next week, we do have a guest on the podcast, Spencer Torak. I'm really excited for that conversation, and I think you will be too. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Long Lens Podcast, and I'll catch y'all later. Bye.